On the fog-covered morning of September 19, 1944, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter stood in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank, his eyes cutting through the ghostly mist of eastern France. The 26-year-old officer had already survived the inferno of the Eastern Front, traded blows with Soviet T-34s at Kursk, and earned his Iron Cross amid battles that reduced whole divisions to ash. Yet nothing in all those brutal years had prepared him for the new machine the Americans were unleashing in the West. Rumors whispered through every panzer regiment, stories of a tank destroyer so quick and so deadly that German crews spoke of it with the same unease they once reserved for the dreaded Katyusha rockets. They called it the Hellcat. 3 weeks earlier, Richter's regiment near Nancy had heard the first reports. A company of Panthers, Germany's pride, 12 of its finest armored beasts, had clashed with a group of American tank destroyers. 17 minutes later, 8 Panthers were burning wrecks. Witnesses said the enemy appeared from nowhere, fired and vanished before return fire could even be coordinated. One shaken gunner swore he had hit one squarely, only to watch it accelerate away faster than any tank had a right to move. At first, German intelligence dismissed the tales as exaggerations born of combat stress. But then the pattern repeated, at Haraucourt, Lunéville, Metz. Everywhere the Americans fielded this mysterious vehicle, the outcome was the same. Brief contact, lightning strikes, and a trail of destroyed German armor. Wehrmacht reports confirmed a disturbing statistic. American contact times averaged just 2 to 4 minutes before the enemy disappeared, often leaving behind twice as many German casualties. The machine they were facing was the M18 Hellcat, a radical creation that defied every convention of armored warfare. Where German Jagdpanzer and heavy tanks relied on thick steel for protection, the Hellcat's designers at Buick Motor Division had chosen a different kind of defense. Speed. They stripped the vehicle to its bare essentials. No excess armor, no unnecessary weight, just a powerful gun, a light frame, and an engine built to outrun death itself. Richter's own Panther was a masterpiece of steel. 45 tons of sloped armor and a high-velocity 75mm gun. But even at full throttle on perfect roads, it managed only 25 miles per hour. In the muddy chaos of France, 15 was more realistic. The captured American manual on his desk claimed the Hellcat could reach 55 miles per hour. To any German tanker, that sounded like fantasy. Yet the battlefield was proving otherwise. The Panther's crew needed roughly 45 seconds to acquire a target and fire, another 15 to reload. At 1,000 meters, the average range of engagement, a Panther might fire twice, perhaps 3 times, before the Hellcat had already closed the distance, fired, and sped away. Its turret, driven by a hydraulic system borrowed from naval guns, could rotate a full 360 degrees in 20 seconds. 3 times faster than the German hand-cranked mechanism. For Richter and his men, that meant they had no more than 3 minutes to fight or die. The Hellcat's story began far from the battlefields of Europe, in the early panic of 1941, when American strategists studied how the German blitzkrieg had crushed Poland and France. Major General Andrew Bruce, commander of the newly formed Tank Destroyer Center at Camp Hood, Texas, reached a controversial conclusion. The answer to enemy armor wasn't thicker tanks, but faster ones. His doctrine emphasized mobility, not mass. He envisioned light, agile vehicles that would hunt tanks the way destroyers hunted battleships at sea. Strike fast, then disappear. The task of building this new breed of tank destroyer fell to Buick Motor Division, a company better known for luxury cars than armored vehicles. Chief Engineer J. Edward Campbell, formerly a race car designer, approached the challenge with an engineer's creativity and a racer's obsession with speed. Instead of starting with armor and adding mobility later, he reversed the process. He began with the chassis of an M24 Chaffee light tank, shaved off every ounce of unnecessary weight, and asked his team a simple question: how fast can we make it go? By July 1943, the answer thundered out of the Detroit arsenal. The T-70 prototype, soon christened the M18 Hellcat, weighed barely 17 tons, half the weight of a Panther, and was powered by a 400-horsepower Continental R975 radial engine, originally designed for aircraft. During its first tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Hellcat's speedometers shocked the observers. It hit 55 miles per hour on pavement and 35 cross-country, the fastest tracked combat vehicle in the world. Some testers joked that it could pass a Jeep on an open road. Buick began full production in early 1944. Within 6 months, the first Hellcats were crossing the English Channel, their arrival largely unnoticed amid the massive preparations for D-Day. By the summer of 1944, over 2,400 units were deployed in Europe, assigned to specialized tank destroyer battalions that operated more independently than standard tank regiments. These units trained for one doctrine above all: seek, strike, and destroy. Lieutenant Marcus Webb of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion saw the Hellcat's potential firsthand during the breakout from Normandy in August 1944. His platoon, 5 Hellcats, intercepted a column of 8 Panzer IVs near Argenton. The battle lasted just 11 minutes. Using their speed and agility, Webb's crews danced around the slower German tanks, striking from multiple angles, retreating before counterfire could be coordinated. All 8 Panzers were destroyed. Webb lost only 1 Hellcat, disabled by a broken track, not a German shell. In his after-action report, Webb wrote, "It's like hunting with lightning. We fire, move, and fire again before they even know where we are." To master the Hellcat required more than courage. It demanded instinct and precision. Sergeant Thomas "Red" Morrison, a former stock car mechanic from Georgia, embodied both. By October 1944, he and his 5-man crew had fought through France in the cramped, open-top turret of their M18, a machine that punished hesitation and rewarded aggression. The Hellcat was not a tank. Its thin armor could stop rifle rounds, but nothing heavier. Its designers believed that if you were being hit, you'd already made a fatal tactical error. Survival depended on never being where the enemy's shells landed. That open turret, seen by outsiders as a death trap, was, in fact, one of its greatest strengths. It reduced weight, improved visibility, and let the crew reload faster. In the tangled forests and narrow villages of Europe, the ability to hear an approaching tank often meant the difference between life and death. Morrison's driver, Corporal James Kowalski, handled the Continental engine like a concert pianist, feeling the vibrations through the pedals, reading the terrain through his fingertips. Private Danny Chen, the assistant driver, kept his eyes on the horizon, mapping escape routes in his head even before combat began. In the turret, Corporal Marcus Washington and Private Antonio Rodriguez operated in near-perfect rhythm. Spot, range, load, fire, move. Their 76mm M1A2 gun could hurl armor-piercing rounds at 2,800 feet per second, enough to punch through 4 inches of steel at 1,000 yards. More than enough to pierce the sides of a Panther or Tiger. And when paired with the hydraulic turret system, that gun could swing and fire on a new target in mere seconds. Traditional tank warfare revolved around frontal slugfests, where armor and firepower determined who survived. The Hellcat's doctrine flipped that completely. It was built for ambush and precision, not brute strength. Morrison's crew specialized in flanking maneuvers, hitting from the side or rear, where even Germany's heaviest armor was vulnerable. Their engagements were choreographed chaos. Find the enemy column, hit from an angle and vanish before the Germans could react. Hellcat crews memorized escape routes as meticulously as their firing data. Within 10 seconds of firing, their driver was already accelerating away at full speed. Within 30, they were gone, reloading on the move, setting up for the next strike. By late 1944, even German intelligence was beginning to grasp the scale of the problem. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber of the 11th Panzer Division analyzed combat data and reached a chilling conclusion. Their beloved armored doctrine, refined on the vast steppes of Russia, was useless in the hedgerows and forests of France. The Panther and Tiger had been built for long-range duels on open ground, where superior optics and gun range reigned supreme. But here, in the narrow roads and foggy woods of Western Europe, those advantages were meaningless. The Hellcat's speed, maneuverability, and rapid-fire accuracy turned every engagement into a race German tanks could not win. Weber's reports estimated that German crews needed 120 to 180 seconds from first contact to effective return fire. The Hellcat's exposure time in that same window was 35 to 50 seconds. Statistically, the Germans were dead before their first shot was even fired. He proposed countermeasures: wider formations, infantry reconnaissance, heavy use of artillery, but none solved the core problem. The Americans were dictating the pace of battle, and in armored warfare, control of time is control of death. By late October 1944, the autumn rain had turned France's roads into rivers of mud. The fog rolled down from the Vosges Mountains, muffling sound and swallowing light. Perfect weather for hunters. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's platoon of Hellcats from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion waited in silence along a ridgeline overlooking the narrow road to Saint-Dié. The conditions were miserable, cold, and wet, but to a Hellcat crew it was ideal. Poor visibility and tight terrain meant German tanks would be forced into predictable choke points, unable to maneuver or bring their heavy guns to bear. Webb had positioned his 5 vehicles like chess pieces. Each Hellcat had a primary firing position and 2 alternates, routes memorized in total darkness the night before. The valley below would act as a killing ground. When the lead enemy tanks entered, the platoon would open fire on the first 2 to block the road, then destroy the last vehicles to trap the column in place. It was the kind of ambush the Hellcat was born for. At exactly 7:40 hours, the German column appeared. 17 vehicles in total, led by 4 Panthers, followed by Panzer IVs and a pair of Jagdpanzers at the rear. Webb waited until the lead Panther was directly below his position, about 600 meters away. "Fire!" he ordered. Corporal Washington's 76mm gun thundered. The armor-piercing shell struck the Panther's rear deck, igniting its engine. A second shot from the neighboring Hellcat punched through the hull. The tank erupted in flames. Within seconds, the valley echoed with overlapping gunfire. The 4th tank in line, a Panzer IV, took a hit that locked its turret ring. Another Hellcat destroyed the rear Jagdpanzer, sealing the German column inside a death trap. Smoke, fire, and confusion filled the valley. For 40 minutes, Webb's platoon conducted a deadly dance, firing, moving, firing again. The Germans tried desperately to organize a response, but every time a Panther brought its gun around, the Americans were gone, reappearing moments later from a different direction. The Germans were fighting ghosts. Oberst Gustav Hoffmann, one of Germany's most experienced panzer commanders, would later describe the experience as fighting shadows that kill. He had led armored units since the invasion of Poland, survived the frozen hell of the Eastern Front, and earned the German Cross in Gold for his leadership at Kursk. But against the Hellcats, all his instincts failed him. His battalion first encountered the American tank destroyers near Lunéville in September 1944. The fight lasted 19 minutes. He lost 7 Panther, nearly half his battalion, and destroyed only 1 enemy vehicle. His crews never saw the enemy long enough to aim properly. The surviving men reported tanks appearing, firing, and disappearing like phantoms. Hoffman's after-action report was blunt. The enemy does not fight in the traditional sense. He executes. The Hellcat had introduced a new law of armored warfare, speed as both sword and shield. Determined to adapt, Hoffman reorganized his battalion. He broke it into smaller groups, trained his men to fire quickly rather than precisely, and sent infantry ahead as scouts to detect ambushes. The changes helped, but the advantage still belonged to the Hellcat. Near Chateau Salin that October, his Panthers managed to surprise a platoon of Hellcats setting up an ambush. The Germans destroyed one and damaged another before the Americans withdrew. For Hoffman, it was a small victory, but also proof that even with new tactics, success required luck more than skill. 2 months later, winter came, and with it, Hitler's final gamble. December 1944 marked the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, a desperate counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. The weather was brutal. Snow fell endlessly, temperatures dropped below freezing, and the fog was so thick that Allied aircraft, the usual masters of the sky, were grounded. For the Hellcat battalions, it was their most dangerous test yet. Captain James Thornton of the 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion watched from a hill near St. Vith as elements of the 6th Panzer Army advanced. Over 200 German tanks, including elite Waffen SS divisions, rolling west in coordinated waves. For the first time, the Hellcats would not be hunting. They would be defending. The Americans dug in, using frozen soil to build hull-down positions that exposed only their turrets. Each platoon had multiple fallback routes marked with tape visible even under snow. The plan was grim but simple. Hold the roads, inflict maximum casualties, and then retreat before being overrun. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cooper commanded one of Thornton's Hellcats covering a valley approach to St. Vith. At dawn, a company of Panthers emerged through the mist. Cooper waited until the lead tank closed to 800 meters. His gunner fired. The shell struck the Panther's frontal plate and detonated its ammunition. The tank exploded, blocking the road. Before the Germans could react, Cooper's loader rammed another round into the breach. A second shot destroyed the next Panther in line. Within 40 seconds, Cooper's Hellcat had fired twice, scored 2 kills, and relocated to an alternate firing position before the Germans could fix its location. That pattern repeated across the line. Strike, move, strike again. Even in a defensive role, the Hellcat's mobility remained its greatest weapon. German artillery could never catch them. Their tanks, bogged down in snow and ice, could barely maneuver. The Americans fought a running battle, trading ground for time and leaving burning armor behind them. For young Lieutenant Carl Schmidt of the 9th SS Panzer Division, the experience was shattering. Fresh from officer school, he had been taught that German armor was invincible if employed correctly. Overlapping fields of fire, strong defensive positions, textbook discipline. His first battle with Hellcats on January 7, 1945, proved how wrong that was. Schmidt deployed 4 Panthers in a textbook formation and was annihilated in 4 minutes. The first warning came when an armor-piercing shell tore through his wingman's rear deck, setting the engine ablaze. Before Schmidt could issue an order, another Panther was hit from the flank. A third attempted to turn its turret toward the enemy, but the target had already moved. Shells came from multiple directions at once. His driver, acting on instinct, reversed their 45-ton Panther behind a barn just in time. An American round struck the ground where they had been seconds earlier. They escaped only by speeding away blind through the smoke. Schmidt later wrote in his report, "There was no battle, only execution." That single phrase captured what every German tanker eventually learned. The Hellcat didn't fight fair. It didn't trade blows or duel for honor. It destroyed quickly, efficiently, and without warning. By early 1945, the Wehrmacht had officially acknowledged the problem in captured training manuals, later translated by the Allies. German tank crews were now being instructed not to engage Hellcats directly. Instead, they were told to withdraw, call for artillery, and avoid combat wherever possible. For an army that built its legend on blitzkrieg aggression, this was humiliation. When the war ended in May 1945, the Hellcat's legacy was already secure. According to U.S. Army statistics, M18 battalions achieved the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle, roughly 4-to-1 overall, with some units reaching 8-to-1. The 704th Battalion alone destroyed over 600 enemy vehicles from Normandy to Germany, losing only 53 Hellcats in total. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The Hellcat didn't just win battles. It changed the philosophy of armored warfare itself. It proved that survival could come not from thicker armor, but from never being where the enemy's shells landed. Speed was its armor. Post-war analysts at the U.S. Army Armored Board identified 4 reasons for the M18's success. First, its power-to-weight ratio, a 400-horsepower engine moving just 17 tons, made it faster than anything else on the battlefield. Second, the hydraulic turret allowed for rapid engagement of multiple targets. Third, the 76mm gun delivered reliable penetration against all but the heaviest German tanks. And fourth, perhaps most crucial, was the doctrine that combined all those strengths into a single philosophy. Strike first, move fast, vanish. The Germans themselves admitted as much. In his 1953 memoir, Oberst Hoffmann wrote, "The Hellcat was not a tank. It was a principle. That movement can defeat mass, that speed can outfight strength." Even after the war, the Hellcat continued to shape military thinking. Its design influenced a new generation of light, fast vehicles. The French AMX-13, the Soviet ASU-85, and America's own M551 Sheridan all carried its DNA. Nations across the world bought surplus Hellcats. Yugoslavia used them until 1972, Taiwan until the mid-1960s, and Venezuela as late as 1975. The Hellcat even saw one last burst of glory in Korea. In 1950, during the desperate defense of the Pusan perimeter, the 773rd Tank Destroyer Battalion used its aging M18s against North Korean T-34s, and won. The same tactics that broke the Panthers worked just as well against Soviet armor. Ambush, flank, withdraw. Sergeant Thomas Morrison, the same man who had fought in France, found himself again behind the open turret of a Hellcat near the Nakhtong River. "It was déjà vu," he later said. "Different country, same game. We shoot, they burn, we move." But Korea also revealed the end of an era. By 1951, the Hellcat was outclassed. Heavy Soviet tanks like the IS-3 could shrug off its 76mm shells. The world was moving toward a new concept, the main battle tank, combining armor, firepower, and mobility into one vehicle. The U.S. Army officially disbanded its tank destroyer units in 1953, replacing the Hellcat with the M48 Patton. Still, the legend endured. At veterans' reunions decades later, former Hellcat crews would gather around restored vehicles in museums. Small, light, almost fragile compared to the behemoths that came after. But when they looked at that open turret and slender frame, they didn't see fragility. They saw survival. They saw a machine that had given them confidence, freedom, and a fighting chance in a war of giants. One veteran put it simply, "You couldn't take a hit in a Hellcat, so you made sure you never got hit." The M18 Hellcat was more than a tank destroyer. It was proof that innovation and imagination could turn weakness into strength. It was speed as armor, motion as strategy, and precision as survival. For the German crews who faced it, Those 3 minutes before the Hellcat vanished at 55 miles per hour must have felt like forever. And for many of them, it was the last eternity they would ever know.